we are now going to continue on the around this motif of quote unquote geoengineering, and it's interrogating this sort of condition as sort of something that the math tells us we need to be understanding in working with in intelligent ways, and yet other things may suggest that this perhaps the worst thing we could possibly do. But the question, I think that one of the entry points into this that we've had has to do with this question that you end with here, and having to do with the composition, the collective composition, the composition of a viable form of planetary governance, again, governance of planetary phenomenon, and the proper use of simulation models into doing this, that is based upon this very sober and secular understanding of exactly what the geochemical predicament that we built for ourselves actually is. And I suppose one way in which we've entered into this is, by the way, introduction to the next group, which we've called everyday geoengineering, is to sort of engage rather directly with what we see as the intrinsically artificial reality of our planetary condition as a starting point. And in ways that might make clear ways in which the refusal to engage and embrace that artificiality has contributed to other forms of denial and neglect that are quite plainly catastrophic. And so once more, this term geoengineering in quotes, as we try to sort of mobilize it and work with it and perhaps replace it with something else, should be defined again by those planetary scale effects, not just by the specific technological interventions, though obviously solar radiation being one of these techniques that we agree is worth understanding further. But also things like regulatory regimes such as carbon taxes, the conservation of natural carbon sinks and biodiversity and so forth and so on. These are also all in a way need to be have these planetary scale effects, and so would need to be included in this definition. And at the same time, the deployment of the technologies at the scale in which you describe is in certain ways seems less than optional if we are in fact to go beyond zero, as you say. And beyond zero, we mean that it's not only necessary to radically cut carbon emissions, as you said, but also to do something with the many billions of tons of that are already there in the atmosphere. Now, one of the questions that, and we'll deal with this also in the group afterwards, which is called Greener New Deals, is addressing ways in which some of these conclusions or approaches seem to be either deliberately or undeliberately excluded from some of the proposed Green New Deals, and in ways that are perhaps don't need to be, and ways that are perhaps also don't speak well of the way in which mainstream environmentalism has approached this problem. So the next group, called Geoengineering, is developed, is looking at Russia, and Russian territory in particular, in relationship to these kinds of initiatives, particularly in terms of carbon capture, but also sort of beginning with this understanding that Russia itself, the territory, so it has been over the centuries a rather massive terraforming initiative, that the state and the nation have emerged from this building of this territory. And so what they will be presenting is some of this research, but also the provocation toward a kind of more inclusive lexicon of approaches that, if we understand them together in a common portfolio, might make the path forward from this a little bit more clear, where political technologies, atmospheric technologies, chemical technologies, economic technologies are not understood as being totally different from one another, but in fact inevitably entangled. So with that, I pass it on to the group Everyday Geoengineering.
Yes, hi all. We are Everyday Geoengineering group. Thank you for introduction and for amazing talk to Holly. Your book was like starting point and big inspiration for us. My name is Vlad. I'm quarantined in Kyiv right now.
Hello, my name is Tatiana. I'm in a lockdown in Moscow.
Hi, I'm Eleanor. Also, a huge thank you to Holly for the talk and for your book. It's really formative. I'm in Australia. I've quarantined. I'm done with that. I'm in isolation technically.
Hi everyone, I'm Yanni. I'm in Brasilia, Brazil, where there's a lot going on at the moment. While we were having this discussion, our Ministry of Justice was fired, but all good. Thank you very much, Holly. This was the perfect introduction. I couldn't recommend enough everyone reading the After Geoengineering book. As Benjamin mentioned, the way that we're approaching this is through a lexicon. So we have a video explaining our thought process of that, and the lexicon will be available in the article in the upcoming weeks. There were some interesting comments about, are these proposals for serious or not? And I think our goal here is to shift perspective and show that yes, they are serious, and we've been doing them basically. And then we move to a Russian plan, or how Russia could and is making use of them. So I'm gonna share my screen.
The future of planet Earth will unfold in an ability to respond not only to a warming planet, but to imagine and transition to life on a cooler one. Emissions from the energy infrastructures of human life are accumulating in the atmosphere at 50 gigatons of CO2 equivalent a year. When overlaid on geological, deep time over thousands of years, the rate of warming since the Industrial Revolution is alarming and uncanny. The IPCC have made clear that temperature increases above 1.5 degrees will tip Earth systems beyond the point of no return. It is also clear that mitigating future emissions will not suffice. History needs to be rewritten by designing drawdown interventions. This is what the planet hacking field of geoengineering has been exploring, with wild proposals for space mirrors, ocean fertilization, and cloud seeding experiments. These are deliberate interventions in Earth's climate system to mitigate adverse effects of global warming, but they leave unanswered who would execute, profit, and benefit from their execution, and how, where, and when they should unfold. Rather than only considering technologies associated with geoengineering, what if climate intervention expanded to include those tools already in place, but recalibrate to a scale of effect? So, rather than a silver bullet for climate collapse, what if we reimagine climate intervention as the careful recalibration of tools already in place? The practical infrastructure to achieve a large scale of effect already exists, but Earth's instruments are out of tune. The Lexicon of Climate Intervention assembles seemingly unrelated instruments that collectively demonstrate how to bring challenges of a global warming and atmospheric insulation back down to Earth, mitigating future emissions and rewriting historical ones. The unifying factor of all the lexicon entries, what renders them comparable to and interactive with one another, is their contribution to a scale of effect. Each entry is categorized either on a timeline, either side of now, as mitigation, future, or beyond zero, past emissions instrument. Some entries represent mitigation instruments that alter future emissions from this moment forward, such as carbon tax, permafrost protection, and 3-day working week, which expands on the current real-time impacts of COVID-19 on the environment and a move toward universal UBI. Other entries describe beyond zero instruments that reimagine the capture and storage or use of historic emissions, such as biochar soil, oyster tector biosequestration, Sink cities, which investigates methods of sequestering carbon emissions in concrete. And many others that might be perceived as cultural, political, economical, or technological interventions. Remember that mitigation instruments will not suffice to limit temperature increase within 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. What if we take to a particular geographical territory to see what combination of techniques might apply? Is it possible for a country other than Bhutan to become carbon negative? The Russian territory holds a unique mixture of opportunity and necessity. Hosting wild variability from megacities, permafrost, forests, natural reserve, and vast mindscapes to the Arctic and Bering Sea, the world's largest country is also heating 2.5% faster than the global average and suffers from ongoing threats from its enormous dependency on extraction economies. Forestry is one intervention we'll explore. The Russian territory hosts the world's largest forest cover, totaling 19% of reserves, that serves as carbon sinks. Can forest watch be seen as a form of geoengineering, for example? If so, what are the impacts of a shift of perspective regarding its threats and opportunities? Russia's vast landmass, oil and gas industry, and hydro and nuclear power infrastructure also place the country in a unique position to consider direct air capture, known as DAC, at scale. These essentially are the usage of large machines to remove CO2 directly from ambient air prior to its storage elsewhere. How many DACs would be necessary to capture all of the country's emissions, and where could they be located? The complexities, risks, and costs of implementing climate intervention are vast, and the larger the intervention, the more inconceivable it seems. But reasons not to consider intervention are no vaster than the critical necessity of a future imaginary. It is time for a different approach, a necessary shift in the way climate intervention is embraced as a necessary project from different perspectives in collaboration.
Thanks very much.